Welcome to a special edition of the Darden Admissions Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'd like to share my recent conversation with Keith McCormick. Keith is the Bodily Bicentennial Professor of Analytics here at the Darden School of Business, and he and I recently connected to talk more about his background, what attracted him to this role, the work he's been doing at Darden, his thoughts on AI, and so much more. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. And as always, if this conversation is helpful for you, please like this episode and subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an update. And remember, you can always check the episode description for links to Darden blogs, social channels, and more. And now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Keith McCormick. Keith, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. How is everything? How are you doing?
I am doing great, actually. This is a wonderful time of year. Of course, we're recording this a couple of days before Thanksgiving, which is always a nice time to be able to relax and get together with family and friends. But also, I love the autumn here in North Carolina. I'm not terribly far from Charlottesville, only about a half day's ride.
Yeah, my hometown is in North Carolina. I'm from Charlotte, so I'm very familiar with fall in the Piedmont, so to speak. So what part of North Carolina?
I live right between Raleigh and Durham. I spend more time in Durham, but literally right between. The post office calls me Raleigh, but I vote in Durham. So I'm pretty close to the county border.
All right, you're fully in the triangle, I bet.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks for your time and thanks for coming on the podcast. We always ask our guests the same first question. Tell us a bit more about you.
Well, they keep on changing the name, but I've been doing similar stuff for quite a long time. So when I relocated to North Carolina, I grew up in Rhode Island. And when I relocated here, it's because I thought I was going to do PhD work at Chapel Hill. In a specialty that's a little bit different than where I landed. I was going to study psychometrics. So I'd gotten very interested in that, psychology and statistics basically kind of blended together. But at the time, I was teaching some software classes for SPSS, the statistics software that a lot of folks, I think, in a university setting might be familiar with. And at first, it was a way to help me pay for grad school, but it turned out to be a career. So that led to statistical modeling and eventually machine learning modeling. So again, the names keep on changing from data mining to predictive analytics. And now, of course, everything is some version of AI. But I've been building one form or another of predictive models for just over 30 years now.
What was interesting to you about building models and doing that work?
Well, I love the variety. Every time I sit down with a client, I learn something new, and not just not just a little bit about the business, but since I'm looking at their data, I really get into kind of the details of their business. So I've been on projects where we're talking about things like helicopter accidents, orthopedic surgery. When I was talking to the physicians on that gig, they even said, should we get you scrubs? Do you want to watch one of the procedures? Manufacturing, worked with a client that makes glass bottles. So just a tremendous variety, and that's really kept it exciting over all these years.
I can believe that. You get to learn about all kinds of new things too, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's just a constant conversation with the client, and then I don't, every once in a while I'll sit down with a client, and they'll want to know if I've done this exact project for a company that's just like them. And of course, that's very rare. But I think once they start to understand the diversity of projects that I've been on, that it means that I must have learned something about that process of getting to know a company through their data. And I think it actually gives me a certain objectivity that I might not have if I only did loan default, let's say.
Yeah, I can believe that. You're at Darden as the Bodily Bicentennial Professor of Analytics. Tell us some more. Tell us a bit more about this role. What exactly is that?
Yeah, it's quite a title, and since I've always been in industry, since I'm not historically I haven't been in academe. I think a number of my colleagues, perhaps even some that are listening now, have just kind of assumed that it's an adjunct teaching role and that I'm teaching a machine learning class or something. But of course, it's really not that at all. So, Sam Bodily is a professor emeritus who was at Darden for many, many years, and he really had the idea to do this. It's the notion is to bring somebody in from industry, somebody with a substantial amount of experience, and have them spend a year at Darden to try to find those synergies between the two. So it's fundamentally a thought leadership role, which is really exciting because when consulting can feel like being on a treadmill, and as much as you might aspire to write for high profile publications or academic publications, a lot of times it doesn't happen. So really, I've got a year to really focus on that. Each of us has defined the role a bit. I'm only the fourth one to have this role. And one of the things that I've decided to do, which I don't think my predecessors did, is write case studies. So I sat down with Darden Business Publishing, and part of the inspiration for that is that we're living in this age of AI. Things are changing very rapidly, and I'm pretty sure that there aren't any Gen AI case studies yet, which wouldn't be a shock, would it? Because we've only been living in this new world for a couple of years now. So if I can manage to, during this short tenure, navigate the case study process, which of course is so important to Darden, but was new to me. I had a chance to sit in already on a couple of classes and see that in action, which was very impressive. And I would love to contribute in that way. So that's one of my goals for the year.
Yeah, have you started working on a case or two? How's that work going?
Well, I have two or three topics in mind, but I'm still fairly early in the process. I mean, the role started in September, and of course, we're talking in November. So I want to do as many as two or three before the year is out, but I'm still kind of a student of the process a bit at the moment. I'm trying to read some case studies because I really want to contribute one that's going to be used. I don't want to just go through the exercise of it. So something that Sam himself told me was that if you're going to write a case study, find out where in the curriculum it's needed and then fill that gap, because then it's going to be used. So I'm still trying to figure out exactly how to position the case studies, but I really do hope to contribute in that way. I really think that would be a lot of fun, but I also think a real contribution of my time here.
Yeah, that's. I think that's a good approach. Good advice from Sam, who would know a thing or two. He was around Darden for a while.
He would, and he's written a bunch of case studies.
Yes, good advice. Obviously, that's how you've been spending part of your time here at Darden. How else have you been spending your time over these past few months?
Well, I'm fortunate in that geographically, I'm the closest to Darden of the previous participant, the previous awardees of this role, and that allows me to come and go a little bit more easily. It is a part-time role because it is just for 1 year, but the proximity allows me to spend some more time. So I'm trying to sit in on classes and just kind of I've been kindly given an office in the faculty building, and I'm trying to network and so on as much as I can. Oh, I'm really looking forward to the AI event that's coming up quite soon. We're talking about this just before Thanksgiving, and on December 5th, there's going to be an AI ethics event, and I'm actually participating as a moderator, and I'm going to be spending the whole day at that event. That's really exciting. So events like that, I've been trying to, uh, for folks that haven't visited yet, uh, it's not as easy as you might think to figure out all the possible ways to participate in events to attend. Because, for instance, data science being my specialty, um, there's also the undergrads and the School of Data Science. So I'm trying to navigate that, but I'm trying to go to as many events as I can squeeze into 9 months.
Yeah, you mentioned you'd sat in on a few classes. What was that experience like?
Well, it was really remarkable. It's really how the idea of contributing cases solidified, in my mind. It was actually, I stumbled into this, but it turned out to be a really powerful experience. I didn't realize that by attending in the morning and then again in the afternoon, that I was going to see the same case presented twice. And unless you've experienced it, you might not you might not expect how fun that was, because the faculty brilliantly lead these case studies because they know where the students have to get, what the goal of the case study is and where the students kind of have to land, so to speak, at the end. But it's all driven by the students. Again, unless you've experienced it, you might not realize that the faculty are only speaking about maybe 5-10% of the time. It's all drawing the insights out of the students. So seeing the same case presented twice really, the light bulb went off, and I really better understood probably than if I had seen two different cases. So I want to have that experience again. I hope to do that again in December, to sit in again and see some more cases.
Did the conversations go in different directions when you saw the students discuss the same case?
Well, there are some key points central to the case that the faculty guide the students to make sure that certain key points are covered. But absolutely, the twists and turns to get to those central conclusions were absolutely different because the students are driving the conversation.
Yeah, super interesting. Thank you for that. To that point, we're always trying to find ways to communicate exactly what the case method is like, and it's one of those things that we always tell people: if you can participate in a case discussion or come and observe a class, it's probably the best way to experience. I think your experience confirms that. I don't know if we can guarantee people can see the same case with two different groups of people, but that's cool that you had a chance to do that.
Yeah, when I scheduled it, I at the moment that it landed in my calendar, I I'm pretty sure that what I was anticipating was two different cases, but it really turned out to be a happy accident, as Bob Ross used to say, right?
Yeah, that's right. You mentioned the upcoming AI conference, which is focused on the ethics of AI, and Darden has this sort of frame around ethical AI generally. We have Lacrosse Institute for Ethical AI. You mentioned you're moderating a conversation or panel. Tell us a little bit more about
Yeah,
that
I'm
panel.
really looking forward to that. So the theme of the breakout session is going to be on privacy, with an alum that has worked at both Capital One and Meta, and that's going to be really great. In fact, I'm chatting with her tomorrow to do a little bit of a planning for that event. But I think it's going to be really great. And I've looked at the agenda. I think folks are going to have a hard time deciding which breakout session to go to, because there's going to be a bunch of concurrent sessions and they really look fantastic. But the keynotes really look impressive as well. And definitely a lot of participation of alums and faculty. So, some really tremendous content, but also there'll be a good opportunity to meet some of the important folks here at Darden.
Well, Keith, I want to take some time to also talk about your career and your experience as a practitioner, because obviously that's really the context for the role that you have at Darden. So you have spent, basically 3 decades uh, building predictive analytics models, and I'm curious, in your opinion, how has this work evolved? How does it compare now versus, say, 30 years ago?
Well, the first thing that I'll say, and I think this might surprise folks, is that it's absolutely changed. I mean, it would be naive to suggest that it hasn't, because we all, check either our LinkedIn feed or some other source of news to see the stuff that's changing on a daily basis. But some threads have really remained the same throughout. For instance, trying to figure out your return on investment before you dive into a six-figure or seven-figure project makes as much sense now as it did 30 or more years ago. What we sometimes forget is that when something comes along, and I don't think any of us would describe Gen AI as a trend, but it is something that possibly is taking the oxygen out of the room when other things are being considered within the enterprise, to bring value. There's so much attention paid to that there's some concern there. So when you're potentially in the middle of a bit of a hype cycle, and that's not to suggest that Gen AI isn't real and not here to stay, but when there's that much excitement, we forget about fundamentals, like trying to make sure that we have ROI. So that certainly is a thread that big data was another time when everybody was rushing to keep up with. A lot of times the focus was on technology and not business fundamentals. So periodically over those years, I've seen that I have to sit down with a client and remind them that there's still a business to be run. So the technology changes, but some of the fundamentals don't.
That's super interesting because I would imagine if you're consulting with a client today, just given everything that's in the news, they might start by asking you about AI tools that could be used here. They may actually begin the conversation there or want to do something with AI and get ahead of all those other things that
Oh,
you're
for
mentioning.
sure. So again, when you're in an environment where um, people feel organizations feel like they're playing catch up because they get the impression that all of their competitors are ahead of them in this game of trying to master AI. But the truth is everybody's struggling because everybody's still trying to figure out how our world has changed since basically Chat GPT 3.5 came out. It became a cultural phenomenon. But again, you got to bring them back to the basics. So what will happen sometimes is in an environment like this, a client will start the conversation. I want to do something with Gen AI. So they don't lead with the business problem. And when things are not quite so frothy, I guess you could say, they'll say, I've got this business problem, Keith, and I trust you to help us figure out where the solution might be. But here's the problem that we want to solve. When the excitement gets up to the fever pitch that we're kind of experiencing right now, they don't lead with the business problem. They lead with senior management really wants to see something done with Gen AI this quarter. And that's when you've got to get people to pause. So we kind of go through cycles like this.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you're right. If before Gen AI was big data, before that it was likely something else. I'm curious when you think about building an effective analytics practice. Obviously, it sounds like connecting is the fundamentals. What else comes to mind to you when you think about building such practice?
One of the tricky things, and I think that organizations struggle with this, and each organization is unique. So it's something that I can help them solve the problem, but I can't really give them a recipe. And that's where data science and machine learning should live. Because some will have it report up through IT, and there's pros and cons of that. Then another common approach is a center of excellence. Sometimes it first appears within a line of business like marketing, because maybe the VP of marketing was the first to bring it into the organization. So that becomes a little tricky, and depending on where it starts, the growth path is a little bit different. But what I often find is that unless you've got senior leadership in analytics, like a CAO, for instance, but a chief analytics officer is not terribly common. There's some industries that have embraced it and some haven't. But unless you have a role like that, then there's very frequently a power dynamic between, let's say, more like a manager or director of data science that's supporting C-suite initiatives, but they themselves don't have a lot of clout within the organization. So it's often the people stuff that becomes what's complicated. not always the technology. And the technology changes, but the organizational stuff, I often remind clients that basically we're using math and technology to solve people problems.
It's really interesting. I don't think that's the first thing that would have come to my mind in thinking about maybe some of the challenges or some key considerations of right. Where does this sit within your organization? How senior of a person ultimately is in charge of this? Where they sit relative to other people in the organization? That's fascinating.
Well, I think that's right. I think what would first come to mind is maybe uh, does my team have the skill set, or maybe things like data governance. But when you scratch the surface, all of those issues often arise from kind of a dysfunctional organizational structure. So those are all there too, but fundamentally it's who reports to who, and how do we ensure that analytics is in the service of C-suite priorities. How do we navigate all of that? That's often fundamental to what's going on.
So we talked a bit about AI, and obviously this is something that sounds like it's very much on clients' minds, and no surprise, just given everything that's in the news. But how do you find that AI is changing the work of predictive analytics? What are you seeing?
Well, I'd like to kind of quote my predecessor here, the gentleman that was in this role last year was named Tom Davenport, that I think is a name that some listeners will know. Written over 20 books. One sometimes has to check with Tom. Sometimes you have to check Amazon in the moment because he comes out with a couple of books a year. Very influential guy, but he likes to talk about generative AI, of course, as opposed to analytical AI. So, and I think that's the phrasing that we're going to use at the AI event next week, Gen AI versus analytical AI. So the first thing to remind everybody of is that the analytical AI hasn't gone away. So that's what I sometimes call traditional machine learning. Tom, I know because I've had a conversation with him about this, doesn't like any phrasing that makes the analytical AI sound old or out of date, like vintage AI. You'll hear some of the names are even kind of funny, vintage AI or legacy AI. But it's really important to remind organizations that those things haven't gone away. So, at the risk of dipping slightly into technical issues, these more traditional techniques that many of us call analytical AI still are the way to go on structured data. And structured data is just your rows and columns. It's the kind of data you could look at in Excel if you chose. You might have tens of millions of rows in it, but still it has that Excel-like structure. And unstructured data is going to be your text, video, all this kind of stuff. We often forget that the newest kinds of AI, the kind of AI that we talk about a lot, is your Amazon Alexa. It's your autonomous vehicles. It's your text processing like ChatGPT type technology. And it's really as simple as that the stuff that we were doing prior to ChatGPT is still what we should be doing with our structured data. And let's face it, organizations have a ton of structured data that's very, very important to their business, and they don't want to take their eye off the ball there. You've got to make sure that you're doing a good job with your structured data. I mean, might you also have tremendous value out of an effective customer-facing chatbot? Absolutely, but you don't want to stop looking at things like loan default and insurance fraud and so on.
When you think about, you know, these emerging technologies and AI, what skill set do you think people need to really be relevant in an analytics field? For folks who are listening, who are curious about the work that you do, maybe interested in for themselves, what skill sets should people be thinking about?
Well, it's tricky because it's changing all the time. But the first few months after ChatGPT 3.5 came out, I think there were kind of two groups that formed. There was the early adopters that couldn't wait to get their hands on it, and some other folks that kind of sat on the sidelines waiting. That's run its course. So now I think if uh, someone is seeking business education, or if they're already started their career. I think pretty much all of us have to spend a little bit of time on these AI chat apps each week, just gaining familiarity at it. I don't think you really have to do anything more sophisticated than that, right? But I just don't think you can participate in these boardroom discussions or in things unless you have some familiarity with what these apps are like. Having said that, the way we implement these models in the enterprise is not through chat apps. Okay. So this is a skill that's a little bit more difficult to take on, but I know that I usually have a goal to spend at least a minimum 4 hours a week reading, articles, watching conference talks. Often I find them on YouTube, just to keep up. But that's kind of the other thing. You have to have a little bit of a familiarity about how organizations are using AI, and to remember that that's separate and distinct from the chat app on your phone, that those are two separate things. So that might be reading business publications or what have you, but just constantly reminding yourself that what I'm doing on my chat app is not the same as what a big organization is doing, with AI. And then again, a reminder not to forget about this more, traditional stuff. So seek out to learn a little bit about how organizations use things like machine learning and so on.
How does coding fit into all of this? How important do you think that is for people?
Oh gosh, that is a tricky one. So I forgot to mention this when you're asking me about one of my goals for the year. I'm going to be doing some research in the Brad Lab. Folks outside of the Darden community won't know what that acronym stands for, but it's a behavioral lab. So what I'm going to do is have some students. They'll probably be undergrads, but anyway, they'll be presented with a coding task, and we're going to be trying to capture exactly how they go about addressing that task. And one of the tasks they'll be doing is some coding with what's called vibe coding. That's when you use a large language model, like Copilot or something like it to help you code. But I don't think that's been studied very carefully. So the jury is still out on what's going to happen to coding. Some folks are a little bit skeptical about vibe coding. Others think that it's going to change everything. So I'll have a better answer in a few months, I hope, because that's an explicit goal of mine, is to do a substantial study with a few dozen, participants.
That sounds interesting. We'll have to check back with you about that. You have a number of LinkedIn courses, LinkedIn learning courses. What do you enjoy about developing these courses? Where do the ideas for the courses come from? Tell us more about all of this.
Well, that really has been rewarding. So back quite a few years ago, IBM bought SPSS, the company. I told you that many years ago when I first started doing this, I was doing SPSS software training. Well, anyway, when IBM bought SPSS, I said, I don't know what's going to happen to my SPSS career, but a major acquisition like this, how can I kind of take the next step in my career? And I started writing technical books, and that's how LinkedIn Learning discovered me. They found the technical book and said that we want you to do a course on this. And the course, not surprisingly, was on SPSS. But once I became part of that community, I got an opportunity to do some courses that were less technical. Like my most popular course is the non-technical skills of data scientists. And I get more into that, kind of that organizational people stuff that I was mentioning earlier is such a threat to project success. And that one course has almost 300,000 learners, which I could have never in a million years predicted. But it's reaching a completely different audience and a much wider audience than I would have ever seen face-to-face in the classroom. So it's really been a remarkable journey, and that's been almost 10 years now.
What's it like to teach an asynchronous course? Like when you put the materials together, you get comfortable with it. Obviously, it's just like it's a lot of you talking, right? And maybe not as
Well,
much feedback, that kind of thing.
no, it's actually an insightful question because it's even if you're really comfortable in front of an audience, it's a transition for sure. So there are two distinct experiences. One is, remember that a lot of these courses are for practitioners. Some are for leadership, but a number of them. It's one of the things that I love about this role at Darden is that I've been trying for years to get more in front of leadership, not only practitioners, right? I think both audiences are important. But the first couple of courses I did were absolutely practitioner courses. So it's me in a soundproof booth. It's a bit like what you might imagine book narration being like. You got a headset, but there's no camera, and there's actually a producer on the other side of a glass booth. So it's an environment you probably don't imagine that what this is going to be like. And I remember when I was doing that, in unless I was able to imagine speaking to a room full of participants, it was really hard to have that engaging style that you need. But since I had 20 years of that to draw upon, I just pretended that the microphone was 20 participants. And doing the more leadership oriented ones where I'm on camera, now you got a teleprompter and all kinds of things, skills that I didn't have when I started, but over a decade now I've gotten very comfortable with. Yeah, but the first time you talk to a teleprompter, it's just a different kind of experience, but it's second nature now.
Yeah, I've had limited experience with that doing some admissions videos. It does take a little while to get used to. It makes you really appreciate people who can do that well, like your presidents of countries or, corporate leaders who can speak very authentically and read off a teleprompter. It's a gift.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course having a good support team for that kind of thing, like I bet you experienced this when you did some teleprompter work. If you're not careful, and silly things that you would never think of, like if the text is too wide on the teleprompter, you'll get what they call typewriter eyes. You'll look like you're going back and forth. So having, thankfully, the LinkedIn Learning folks are such pros at this that even the first course that I did, I might have been uncomfortable at first, but they knew how to coach me to do it right, get the speed right, and all that kind of thing.
How do people find your courses on LinkedIn Learning? Do they just search on your name or?
Well, now now that I've been at it for quite a few years, I think sometimes people do, but certainly when you first start out, that's never the case. They're searching for the topic, and then so for instance, there's a informal rule that the welcome videos have to be 45 seconds because that's how long you have to explain what the topic is. Because the idea is, if there's a couple of similar courses, somebody's trying to find out, well, what's a little bit different about Keats? Why would I choose Keats over some others that cover the same material?
Well, I want to come back and talk a little bit more about AI. Obviously, a very hot topic these days. What AI trends are you following?
Well, the really big one this year, and everybody, whether they just kind of follow the tech news or there's someone like me who knows they're going to be asked about it and asked to speak about it, has to try to keep up with it. But it's agents, so it's everywhere. But there's competing definitions of it. Some people think that it's going to change the world, within like a year. Some people think that it's hype. That's that's the really big one now. And just within the last couple of weeks, I can't find a consistent definition of this one, but people are starting to talk about super agents. I don't know if you've heard that phrase yet, but agentic AI, and are AI agents the same as agentic AI? People are even debating things like that. So this is a trend that's slightly frustrating because there's no consensus yet on it. And again, you have both extremes, that it's world changing or all hype. But that's one that I'm going to really have to be focused on over the next several months because all the conference organizers want to have that addressed. People seek out conference sessions on it. Certainly the LinkedIn, I have not contributed a course on this subject, but the LinkedIn library is actively seeking out authors, they call us authors, to have content on agents. So that's a big one for sure. And it's one where we don't really know where we're going to land in 6 to 12 months, but it's a super hot topic.
I want to stick with this for a second because I've seen commercials about agentic AI. And so I recognize there's not true consensus here, but in your opinion, what is agentic AI? How would you explain it to someone?
Well, I think everybody agrees that the agent, okay, is some kind of a call to a large language model so that you can control operations with natural language. So that rather than having to be a coder, you can say in natural language something that you want to do. Okay. Now, what is that something? This is where there's not much consensus because the something could kind of be almost anything. But the way most people describe it is that the agent performs these tasks that you give it using what are called tools. The tools could themselves be a large language model, but the tools could also be something fairly basic like an SQL query to retrieve some data. But, and this might be surprising, what a lot of folks have concluded is that it's really kind of a new kind of programming, because if you've ever tried to give a large language model a long, rambling, vague question in the context window, it doesn't do so well. It's much better at very specific, queries. The more specific you are, the more likely it is to give you a consistent response. So therefore, you want to break it up into little pieces. And then you can see how that fits what I was just describing. Because if you consistently break it up into little pieces, the agent controls sending that piece out to be processed by a tool. You get the answer back, and then it sends something out to a second tool and a third tool and so on. So one of the classic examples is planning a trip. One tool could be looking for flights. Another tool could be looking for lodging. A third tool could be booking activities or something like that. And then the agent is assembling all this information, then presenting you back a plan for your trip. And we're not quite at the point where the agent is actually booking travel in the sense that money is changing hands, but that's where the disagreement starts. Are we close to that? Are we just a few months away going to be your large language model travel agent is not only planning your trip, but booking it, and you start to get confirmations in your email? I'm not ready. I'm not ready to do that yet. but some people describe it as if that's right around the corner.
I'm curious about the polarity around these agents. Like some people obviously evangelize, say this is where it's going, this is great. Other people highly skeptical. The people who are on the skeptical end, what's their take on all of this? Just another way, sort of repackaging
Well,
the idea.
there's more than one way to be skeptical. But I was just talking to a colleague last week at a conference, and he said, but just the simple narrative that I was describing of the agent calling tools, calling the first tool, coming back and calling a second tool, and so on. He said, but that's crazy, Keith. Why do people want to do that when large language models aren't that great at if-then logic, right? Which is a very kind of simple critique. But what he really means by that is, for decades, since mid-century, we've been developing computer languages that are highly structured, that sure, they take a little bit of learning to master, but they're specifically designed that every time I write this computer command, I always know exactly what I'm going to get back. Okay. Natural language has obvious appeal. It's easy. It's convenient. We can talk to a computer like we talk to a fellow human. But we all know that we don't get that consistency of answer back. So is that a trade-off that we're willing to make? Do we really want to trade away the consistency for a little bit of, so we get a little bit of convenience, but we lose that consistency and have to deal with things like hallucinations. So that's basically what the critique is why are we even trying to do this with natural language? Computer languages have been invented for a reason. We always know what we're going to get. Do we really want to say goodbye to that?
And the people who are really sort of evangelizing for this, what do they say?
Oh, well, they just think that everybody wants it, and the technology might not be there yet, but it's close. So if we can get there, if we can get to that finish line and have natural language that's convenient, but that also gives us the desired result, that it's going to change the world.
That's a pretty big jump from just booking travel.
Yeah. Well, it could be any number of things. Travel is one of the most favorite examples, but again, it's anything that these tools could do, but controlling the tool with a large language model.
Very interesting. I just have been struck by the fact that there doesn't seem to be a ton of middle ground when it comes to talking about AI. There tends to be these sort of strong camps. Maybe there's some people in the middle. I tend to meet people who are either very big proponents or very skeptical. What do you make of this polarity
I think
around this
I
technology?
think my experience is largely the same. Yeah, I think we're seeing those extremes. Um, I'm possibly someone that you could describe as being in the middle, and that I think that um, whenever I'm giving a workshop on AI, like at a conference or a conference talk, I usually talk about how important 2012 was. 2012 is when deep learning neural networks won a computer vision competition, and you would think, wow, that sounds very hidden away in academe. But when that happened, everybody in the room recognized that something big was happening. So Silicon Valley started to make offers to everybody that was involved. And we know some of those names, Jeff Hinton, Ilya Sutskever, people that have, famous names now. But the reason I mention this is that that's really when this started to happen. ChatGPT is more recent, of course, but it was just 13 years ago that there was this huge change in how we do things in AI. So for me, the use cases that leverage that technology effectively, I'm very pro AI, because if you look at computer vision and audio and video and all this kind of stuff, again, we made no progress on that for years and years and years. And then in the wake of this event in 2012, rapid progress in all of that. I think we all know, for instance, that when we're talking to our smart devices at home, they understand us better than 5 years ago. I don't think anybody would doubt that. So for me, there's certain use cases that AI is really perfect for. And then there's other use cases where we seem to think that these new technologies in AI have changed everything, but they've actually changed, again, the unstructured data tasks where we had made no progress for the longest time. Whereas the structured data, the more tried and true that's already embedded in the enterprise, and that IT teams and enterprise data teams and analytics teams are already familiar with, there's no reason to jump ship on those. So I'm skeptical that AI brings something to traditional use cases that we didn't have, because there's not a lot of evidence for that. But I'm absolutely on board with the fact that we're experiencing a sea change in these things that we couldn't do for the longest time. Facial recognition. We just know that this kind of stuff works better. Could you imagine trying to have, looking at your phone to turn it on 15 years ago? It probably would have taken 5 minutes to get it to work every time. And now sometimes I barely lift the phone up. It's only halfway to my face and it already has figured out who I am, even if it's dusk or even kind of dark. But anyway, so clearly 10 years ago, we weren't there with computer vision. So that's where I'm staying. I'm optimistic about some use cases, and I'm a little skeptical about others. That feels like healthy skepticism to me, but I agree with you that out there it's mostly polarized.
Yeah, I appreciate the nuance there. The other thing that sort of got my attention, and I think why the ethical conversation is so interesting is you see some of the people who were early on in this neural network work. You mentioned Jeffrey Hinton, who've come out and expressed concern about the direction of artificial intelligence and where some of this is heading, and are there enough guardrails and all this kind of stuff. What do you make of those conversations?
Um, this is a really fascinating one. This brings me back to things that I've been curious about for the longest time. Uh, an interesting fact about me is that when I was an undergrad, I wanted to take some psychology courses. I went to an engineering school, and my curriculum didn't really rely for this. And I was on an RTC scholarship, and it was really important that I keep the Army happy. So I had to get a little creative. So I ended up getting an interdisciplinary degree, not a computer science degree, even though I was a computer science major, to make room in my curriculum for these psychology courses. So I had to give my interdisciplinary degree a title, and it was Natural and Artificial Intelligence. And that was way back in 91. So I've been thinking about this for a long time. And there's a subtlety in Jeff Hinton's argument that I think sometimes people miss, because not everybody agrees with him, because he seems to be a bit concerned about a fairly short timeline, and that's where not everybody agrees. But if you follow what he said about this over many years, for decades, he thought that what was really fascinating about AI was that getting AI to work better was teaching us about how we think. And that's when he made his real break, is when he decided that AI isn't like the way we think at all. Kind of like people describe a bird's wing and an airplane wing, that they accomplish similar things, but design wise, they're very different. So he realized that AI potentially can learn faster than we can. And I'm not necessarily agreeing with him on this particular issue, but I'm trying to characterize his position. And the main reason he says that is that if you've got a fleet of 10,000 autonomous vehicles, when one of those 10,000 vehicles learns something, it can communicate that learning to all the other vehicles. And he underestimated this, and how humans really have no equivalent to that, this kind of hive mind kind of learning. I don't think he's ever used that phrase, but it, makes me think of sci-fi type stuff to have the 10,000 cars all teaching each other. So he said, wow, maybe this is all going to happen a lot faster than I thought because of this. So he was always saying that AI was coming short of what the human brain could do. And he still thinks that AI is very different from the human brain. But he said, wow, maybe the AI actually has some advantages over the human brain, like the one that I just shared. And I think we'd all agree that clearly 10,000 humans can't learn like 10,000 autonomous vehicles that are on the same network that can talk to each other. So he said, wow, maybe this is all going to happen faster than I thought. So that's the part of it.
So it's pace. That's the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. When it really sunk in that, well, the way he puts it is basically it's a huge neural net. And if you just average the weights, the little coefficients or the little, uh, uh, measurement, they're like beta coefficients in a regression, if anybody can picture that. But he said, these huge models, if once you figure out what those weights are, you can average them or pass them on to another model, and then it really sunk in what the implications of that was. As you put it, the rate of change, the pace of change, is faster than he thought when he was younger. But he has become a bit of a controversial figure.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's fascinating to me is that there's a lot of controversial figures around this particular topic. People with very strong opinions, oftentimes in opposition to other people with very strong opinions. And I think it'll take a while for consensus to emerge or to see who's right. That's what's interesting.
One of the famous your comment made me think of of a name. One of the famous skeptics is a gentleman by the name of Gary Marcus, who's a cognitive scientist. So if someone wanted to get, a skeptic to play off their favorite AI optimist, he's kind of an interesting person to read. Again, a controversial figure.
Another thing that people seem to have opinions about these days is whether there's an AI bubble. And I'm curious, what do you make of all this conversation?
Well, I'm not. I've always been busy doing data science, so I'm not. If we're thinking specifically about the market, I follow the market like I think most of us do. I don't consider myself an expert in it. I think there's no question that there'll be periods of profit taking, as the finance folks like to talk about. And I don't think that's the same as saying that AI's run out of, I just mentioned that name, Gary Marcus. He's always making the point, they can't possibly grow as fast as they have been growing because they've already consumed the whole internet. They have nowhere else to go for more scale. I'm not certainly not taking a position like him, but I think that when these companies grow as rapidly as they do, that there'll be periods of profit taking. But I think over the long haul, they'll continue to grow. Again, I'm not really a finance or a Wall Street guy, but I do find the picks and shovels argument interesting. That's the companies like NVIDIA will do well, even when sometimes an effort to produce an AI solution may or may not work out, that hardware sales will continue to thrive. I find that argument compelling. So I guess I'm an optimist over the long haul, but I think there will be periods of profit taking, and they could result in substantial dips.
Yes, it does align with other conversations we've had with faculty about this, where basically emphasize the time horizon for the companies that are really, heavily investing in this area may not be short-term investments. These are much longer-term plays to maybe be the last one or two companies standing when all is said and done that have really built these technologies and kind of become the source or a handful of trusted partners with this. Like it's a long-term view.
Oh, well, I think that's insightful. And then if there's consolidation, as you've just suggested, that might not just be a dip. I mean, if someone has invested only in that one player that doesn't survive consolidation, that could really be, pretty dramatic. So if I'm optimistic over the long haul, that's not the same as saying that we might not have some pretty severe consolidation. I would tend to think that we might at some point.
Well, one more question for you, Keith. I'm curious. We likely have people who've been listening to this who are thinking about their future MBA. Thinking about pursuing an MBA. What would you be thinking about if you were coming into an MBA program these days?
Well, there's going to be a real temptation to get excited about the technology, even wonder about, should I learn coding, or what about the vibe coding that we were talking about, and so on. If somebody wants to pursue those kinds of things, I certainly wouldn't talk them out of it. But I would suggest that they find a way to learn some things about the organizational issues that I raised earlier, because that might not be on their radar, but I think it needs to be. So there's been a literature on this for a very long time about how to structure like a center of excellence, how to decide which projects to pursue. And I think somebody would be well served to make sure that they spend some time on that, because those problems aren't going away.
Well, Keith, thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
And that was my conversation with Keith McCormick, the Bodily Bicentennial Professor of Analytics here at the Darden School of Business. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at Darden, that's Darden, @virginia.edu. Till next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.